Hello and welcome back to the She Lives Purposefully podcast. My name is Megan and I am so thankful that you are here today. It is such a good day because I had such a sweet conversation with a brand new friend. Her name is Jessica Mathisen, and we are having a conversation that we have never had on the podcast before. It's something that you guys have asked me to talk about, and I honestly, it's not something that I'm experienced in, so I didn't know where to begin. And so when Jessica and her team reached out, I knew that this was just the perfect fit. And we are talking all about foster care families, the system, adoptive families, all of these things. And I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. Jessica has written a children's book about the experience of a girl going through foster care, and all from the lens of people in this girl's life, encouraging her in the Lord. And it is just such a sweet conversation. We talk about Jessica's experience as a foster parent and also an adoptive parent, and so much more. Jessica is a podcaster, she's an author, she's a wife, she's a mama, and seriously, we hit it off so well. Like, she is just such a new good friend, and I'm so excited for you to hear this chat. Also, if you are not already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening from. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button as well. And if you're watching on podcast or Spotify, to rate or review the show. It helps other people to find the show, to know whether or not they should give it a listen and what you think about it. And two, I just want to thank you so much for being here. You are awesome, especially my weekly listener girls. Seriously, you are what makes the show. You are what makes. Oh my goodness. This show go round. I am so thankful for you. And two, I'm thankful for our sponsors. You guys, they seriously keep content free. So if you hear about an advertiser that you're like, oh my gosh, I love them so much, definitely check them out using the link and the code that we provide. It helps support our show, helps content be free, and these kind of conversations just keep happening. And I am just so thankful and so blessed to be able to do this, to be here with you, having these Christian women chats with our favorite drinks. I had a lemonade earlier and also an iced coffee, and right now I'm doing water because I need to be a hydrated queen. I felt so cringe that I said that. Anyway, I'm excited for this conversation. Thank you for being here. Let's chat with Jessica. Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the She Lives Purposely podcast. I am so excited for today's topic, today's conversation. We were talking a little bit beforehand, but I have had several people reach out to me wanting to talk about things we're talking about today. So I think it's going to be really good. I'm so thankful that you're here. Before we dive in, can you tell us in your own words a little bit about who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm excited to be here too. I'm really excited just to be able to share a little bit on my heart. But my name is Jessica Mathisen, and I live outside of Atlanta. And I am mostly a stay-at-home mom. I've got three kiddos, but in the fringe hours, I write and do some speaking and podcasting. And so I can get a little bit of those creative juices flowing when the kids are with my mom or taking naps or whatever, but I'm mostly a stay-at-home mom, and I love to talk about foster care because it just forever changed our family.
Yeah, I love that. I'm also a stay-at-home mom, and same in those fringe hours. I love the way that you worded that. I'm gonna steal that from now on.
It was not original to me. Someone else came up with it, and I just loved it because I'm like, that's exactly what it is. It's on the little fringes where you're just
Yes,
squeezing out every last drop that you can from every minute of the
totally.
day.
Like after bedtime, like, okay,
Yes.
editing this, recording an ad,
Yes.
whatever it is. So I love it. Okay, tell us, if you will, about your experience with being a foster mom and also an adoptive mom. And I want to know it all. Like, what led you to that? What put it on your heart originally? What is that process like? I would love to hear your experience, and then we can talk a little bit more. You wrote a book on these things, and yeah, so I just would love to hear your personal experience with that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because my husband and I were married. We're celebrating 10 years in just a
Oh,
couple of weeks,
oh,
and our
congratulations.
thank you. It's really exciting. Our romance was a little bit of a whirlwind. We dated, engaged, married all within 9 months.
Love. That's
And on
awesome.
our very first date, we actually talked about adoption. We had met online. And
I
so
love it.
we just I mean, we had already talked about a whole bunch of different things, like through the eHarmony little steps of communication.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we knew a lot of stuff about each other before we actually sat down face to face and we talked about adoption. And then fast forward a couple of years when we were actually married and we had been trying to grow our family the natural way. And, I had some women's health issues and it just wasn't happening. And so we had some friends of ours who also had some fertility issues that had gone to a conference that was hosted at our church at the time. And it was hosted by a nonprofit, a local nonprofit that supports foster and adoptive families. And so at the time, you could go and you could learn about foster care and about adoption, regardless of whether or not you were already a foster or adoptive parent. A lot of the people at those conferences would go to get like their continuing education things or whatever
Okay.
to keep up their hours, but we went just to learn. And they had done the same the year prior, so they said you guys should go to this too. And so we're like, okay, let's go. I mean, what else do we have to do? And we were trying to kind of hold everything with open hands. And so we went to the conference and both felt like after we left that day that we were supposed to enter into foster care. And it's funny because I've told this story a lot of times, but I really didn't realize kind of how miraculous that was until
Mm,
years later, because my husband is more of like the brakes and I'm the gas. He's more of a slow processor. I just go with my gut. And for him to kind of arrive at a decision like that,
yeah.
that's like life changing in one day, it was a really big deal. For me, it was
Yeah.
like, oh, I think we're supposed to do this. But for him, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's huge. So it took about a year to actually become approved and licensed. It took a while for us to be able to actually get on the calendar the classes that you have to take and all of that. And then of course they have to do a home study and background checks and physicals and drug tests and just it's a lot. Tons of paperwork. And so about a little over a year later, we welcomed three kiddos into our home, three elementary school age kiddos, and they were with us for the summer. And then miraculously, I did get pregnant with our son.
Wow.
And we actually were moving. We lived in a different town at the time. So we were moving like just across town, like to a bigger house and to like closer to friends and family and stuff. And so in that time, I actually got cold feet because we had always said that we weren't going to foster as like a solution to infertility. We felt like it was a calling and something that we were supposed to do regardless of what our family makeup
I
looked
love
like.
that. Yeah.
And so at that time though, and I'm like, wait, no, I like am carrying this child and I've never done this before. Like, I don't know that I can mother another woman's children in addition
Yeah.
to having a biological child. Like that just seems a little crazy now. And my husband was like, no, like we said we were gonna do this. And I was like, okay. So
I
6 months
love.
after that,
Yeah.
we welcomed our forever daughter. We didn't know at the time that she'd be our forever daughter, but
Okay.
she
Yeah.
came to us when she was 15 and she's now 22. And then 3 months later, my son was born. So it's funny because her birthday is in May and so is his, and they're 2 days apart, but like 16 years apart.
Wow. Yeah.
And then a year after that, we had a tween girl live with us for about a year. And then since then, we haven't actively fostered because we moved like an hour and a half away into Metro Atlanta. So,
Yeah.
but that's kind of the journey of all the different placement stuff we've had. But we felt called to foster care, I think, because we wanted to just serve our community.
Yeah.
We knew and had a lot of friends who had adopted, but we felt like with foster care, it was a way that we could serve and give back and love the whole family. Whereas adoption was kind of like this clear cut thing, at least in a lot of cases, not always, but if it's not an open adoption, usually you're not going to have like a relationship with the bio parents or anything. And we felt like with fostering that we could try to develop a relationship with the parents because
Yeah.
the goal is always reunification. And so we wanted to work alongside the parents because we knew that we weren't ever going to take their place and we weren't trying to get their kids from them. We wanted for them to be able to do what was needed to be able to create a safe environment for their child to come back to. So,
Wow. That's beautiful. I love how you mentioned too, one, the calling that you guys felt. I also love that you were open about how you felt then when you were pregnant and you're like, okay, wait, like,
I was like,
kind of having
never
those
mind.
mixed feelings. Yeah, because I'm sure
Yeah.
that's very real for a lot of people. And then too, just your husband being like, nope, and you're like, all right, like we're
Yes,
doing
sir.
this. I know it's so fun. No, I love it. I think that's really cool. I love that part of the story too. Now, the tween that you had brought in I think you said is she part of you call it Forever Family now too, or because you have
No, so
three?
our bookend placement, so our one in the middle who came, she's with us forever and ever. But our three elementary school kids ended up reunifying with
Okay.
dad, and then our tween ended up reunifying with her mom as
Awesome.
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Sweet.
mhm.
Wow. Wow. That's so beautiful. I love that. I want to talk about because the book that you have, and I have the title here, No Matter Where I Go, God's Love for Kids in Foster Care. I want to talk about your experience with maybe their perspective and what they go through and things like that. But I do want to talk about first, and maybe it kind of ties into it. What is something that you wish that people and even churches knew about this process, about foster care? Yeah, what's something that you wish that they knew that maybe it feels like they're just not understanding. I don't know. Maybe we just aren't. Maybe it's not understanding, but we just don't know. We're not educated in this. Yeah. What's something that you wish that they knew?
I think there is a lack of understanding for how unique of an experience it is to be a foster parent, because you are parenting someone else's children, and there is a lot of unknown. You don't know if those children will be with you for 2 weeks, 2 years, 2 months. Like, there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And there were, when we first began, like with that first sibling group,
Yeah.
sometimes people would say things that were so hurtful. Like, we had would bring them to church and everything, and people would be like, oh, welcome to parenting, bet you're tired, and just things like that were like,
Totally.
okay, yeah, but not for all the normal reasons. Like, for all the normal reasons and then some. Like, first of all, we'd never been parents before. Second of all, these are not our kids. Third of all, like, these kids have come from very hard places, and so they
Yeah.
have behaviors that exhibit themselves in really difficult ways.
Right.
And we were drowning. And so it was really hard for people like that had been parenting for a while to be like, woo, you got what was it? People would just they would always say, you're baptized by fire, like, welcome to parenting. And and like, I think they were trying to, like, I guess be funny or silly or like
Yeah.
relate, but it was, honestly, it was really annoying and
Yeah.
frustrating for us because it felt insensitive.
Totally.
Because the things that meant the most to us were when people would say, like, hey, I bet you're having a really hard time right now, like, how can I pray for you? Or, is there a way that I could take the kids for you and take them to the park so you could get a break? Or could I bring you a meal? And not that we did it to be served, but when people meet you with like compassion and understanding, it's a lot better than like making jokes or trying to kind of like egg at you because of like some you know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Like, I think that
Totally.
people were trying to find like common ground, but it's not the same. Like,
Yeah.
parenting and foster parenting, obviously they go hand in hand. Like, it's loving a child and discipling a child, but there's so much that is a part of parenting that just isn't a part of, quote, normal parenting or traditional parenting. And
Yeah.
so I think that was really difficult. And just understanding and seeing that like foster parents do have that unique set of challenges, and so they do need a place to be seen and be heard, and they need community of people who get it. I think a lot of
Yeah.
churches don't always understand and see that. Like, this is a special need, and this is something that we need to make sure that we're addressing and make sure that we are looking out for. I think a lot of churches are kind of like, oh, like, as long as we've got this and this and this, we're fine. But having like a specific ministry, or at least, maybe a support group or something for people who are within this unique calling makes a big difference.
Totally. And I think I'm sure a lot of churches would want members of their congregation, the body of Christ, to like, especially if they feel called to it, to step into these roles. How
Right.
powerful and impactful and loving and selfless like that these roles are. And so to then on the flip side of that being like, okay, how can I best support those people who feel called to this? And like you said, the unique challenges that are there that might not be there in parenting. Like somebody who has a biological child, it's just
Right.
a separate set of challenges. So that's really enlightening and like interesting to see. I'm curious too, like for children in foster care, are there like myths or things as well that you hear about, that you see? And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I guess specifically maybe even with the kids, more so than the parents, but other like myths that you're like, okay, people believe this, but this is just not true. And I think it's really
Yeah.
important for people that to be dispelled.
Yeah, I think so. For the kids, I think people want to think like that um they want to see their behaviors and only look at the behaviors, and a lot of the time people or children within care may have like a set of diagnoses that are, usually behavior related, trauma related, and
Yeah.
so it's very easy for people to only see them through that lens and to see them as a problem, like, oh well, that's a problem kid because they've got daddy issues or something like that. Like people can just be insensitive when they talk about them in that way. And then I think the same is true for the parents as well. Like, well, if they would just get it together, their kids wouldn't be in care. And, people can just be very harsh and insensitive when talking about the families as a whole, these vulnerable families. And the truth is that with these kids, they've been through a lot and they've seen a lot and experienced a lot that most of us haven't experienced and haven't seen. And because of that, they're survivors. And yes, they have been victims of different things that have happened, but I think it's really important that we don't label them as such, because they don't have to live the rest of their life in that way. They don't have to claim that as their identity as a victim. And so when we look at
Hmm.
it through the lens of Christ and we see like, okay, no, this is a survivor. This is a child who has endured. We can call out that strength in them and say like, look, you've made it through this and this and this. Like, because God has brought you this, he has a purpose for you in this. And I think encouraging them and speaking life over them. And the same is true for the parents, because the parents are perpetuating cycles that they've been a part of for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's abuse or neglect, like it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's come from a place that is broken within them as well. Whether they were abused or neglected or something happened that just kind of flipped a switch and was really, put them on a trajectory that they never thought they'd be on, whether it's mental health or substance abuse. And so I think it's just really important overall that when we're thinking about the families who are within the system, that we just think about them with a lens of compassion. It's hard as a foster parent. Sometimes, honestly, it can be hard to maintain that compassion when you're
Yeah.
dealing with those issues in your home day in and day out. You can have these thoughts of like, oh my goodness, like if their mom didn't do this, then I wouldn't have to deal with this. And if this hadn't happened, and da da da. But I think we have to remember again, like it all comes back to grace and the fact that, but for the grace of God go I. Like, we don't know what would have happened to us if we had something that happened in our past that, just triggered something and put
Yeah.
us on a different trajectory. It only takes one decision to completely change your life for the better or for the worse. And so I think just having that attitude of humility and grace can take you a long way.
I love it. The humility and grace and compassion. That's so good because, like you said, a lot of us haven't maybe experienced the things that these kids and even the parents have gone through that are leading to a lot of maybe, the choices that the parents have made or just the different things that the kids are struggling with. But I just think it's really powerful too, where it's like talking about in our own lives, there's one decision that could lead us down a similar path. And
Yeah.
yeah, the humility where it's like the take heed, in scripture too. And I just think that's really important and really powerful. Everything that you said there. I have some more questions for you too. Just, I guess, in line with this whole part of our conversation, what are practical ways that people in the church, the body of Christ, can come alongside, whether it is foster parents or foster kids too, or just the families as a whole? How can we practically help and support?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that a lot of people want to count themselves out, because if they are not called to take kids into their home, they think, well, what else can I do?
Totally.
But there are so many things that you can do. So I think for foster parents, like I said, taking kids for an hour or two and taking them to the park or the movies or over to your house, or, for play dates with your own kids, whatever, just giving them a break, babysitting, that's huge for us, because I did have such a huge age gap, with a 16-year-old and a newborn. There was a lot of help with transportation, with our daughter, like taking her back and forth to school, practices and stuff after school, because it would often be
Yeah.
during nap time. um
Right.
there there were people who would bring us a meal every week, and that was huge, just knowing like Tuesday nights I don't have to cook, we're gonna get a meal and I can just rest, and knowing like I don't have to figure out what we're eating.
Yeah.
And then there was a local business owner who was, he had like a landscaping company, and he would cut and service lawns for foster parents once a month. And
Wow.
we had him do that one time. So if you're thinking like there's nothing I can offer, that's not true. So if you have some kind of gift or talent, there's some way that you could use that to come alongside foster parents or kids in care. For example, there was a girl that we loved who did photography, and she was an intern under me at our church, when I had been on staff at our church before I stayed home, and or at least went part-time at that time. And she loved photography, and our daughter was interested in photography, so she would just have her shadow along on different photo shoots and taught her how to use the camera.
Yeah.
So there's like so many different ways, and it's usually not something that necessarily cost you, except for costing you your time.
Yeah.
And so it's that time that you can invest. And then honestly, within the families, as far as loving the parents of the kids in care, prayer is huge. So we would have a lot of people praying around court dates and things, and we would let them in, obviously not sharing every single detail of their lives and trying to use discretion, but just let them know like these are the ways you can be praying.
Yeah.
And so just prayer is huge, and we saw God answer so many different prayers and move in so many different ways that felt like they were impossible, because we had an army of people behind us who were helping us and holding us up in prayer in dark times when we honestly didn't feel like we could keep going.
Yeah, yeah, that's so powerful. It reminds me too of what you were talking about earlier on in our conversation about how the goal is always reunification with the family. And so it just is such a different mindset than like adoption, for example. And you
Right.
really are championing and praying for the parents of these kids, and hoping for that and praying for that, which is really, really big. I do want to ask you too, and this is a little bit of a pivot. So yeah, it's a little bit of a pivot, but I feel like there is just a very sometimes negative and tricky connotation when it comes to foster parents, foster families. There are just, I guess, abuses in the system, and
Yeah.
things like that. And so for the person listening who almost maybe has a negative taste in their mouth of foster care as a whole, just hearing that, and it's like, oh, like I almost don't even want to like touch this with a 10-foot pole, because it just
Yeah.
seems like it's tainted, and
Mhm.
the kids who are in foster care maybe are not treated well, things like that. What would you say maybe to that person, either one, to encourage them that they can be the difference in that, or yeah, I guess just what would you say to them?
Yeah. So that's, oh man, that's hard. There are so many different broken parts of the foster care system as a whole, with caseworkers being overworked and overextended and having just so many different children that they're responsible for, with judges who don't always make fair calls that are on behalf of the child's true interest. There's just so much. And then, of course, with foster parents who take advantage, who then perpetuate even more abuse within their homes,
Yeah.
or, who are in it for the money, as horrible as that sounds, as corrupt as it is. Um, I think the biggest thing to remember is that when God calls us to something, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. And it's not just because he called us to it, doesn't mean that there's not going to be any struggle. And I think that remembering that and knowing that, okay, yes, we are operating within a broken system, but we're dealing with people. Ultimately, it's people who we're dealing with. And all of this whole system and the people that we're dealing with also represent that unseen world that we don't know about. All of the, or not that we don't know about, but that we're not totally aware of or not always mindful of, with this the spiritual attack and the spiritual warfare that is so real.
Yeah.
Because when you think about why kids come into care, all of that is because of things that the enemy has planted within the minds of their parents, and, just brokenness and generational sin. And there's just so much there. And so I think the biggest thing to remember is that when you're looking at that broken system and saying, I don't want any part of it, I think it's important to remember that there is so much joy and so much reward, even if you don't always see it. Like it says in Galatians, we keep on doing what's good, even if we don't see the harvest, because we will reap a harvest eventually. And so I think knowing that we are in it for the Lord and letting that be what sustains us is the only way that we're going to be able to get through it. Because otherwise, like all the other things that you hope for, like, your sweet little Instagram moments, or I know for me, I like to say that when I got into it, I used to think of like adoption and foster care as like Matilda and Miss Honey. And I was like,
Right.
oh, like, because I was a school teacher. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to like take these kids into my home. And it's just going to be like so sweet, just like Miss Honey and Matilda. And like, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
not like that at all.
Right.
I mean, of course, there are beautiful moments, but like overall, it's day to day life with hard things.
Yeah.
And so I think just acknowledging and recognizing that, like, it's a hard thing, but we do hard things through Christ. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that I could say, is because we're not going to have sunshine and rainbows every day, no matter what it is that God's called us to. And there's brokenness in whatever He's asked us to do, because we are on this side of heaven.
That is so good. I loved that answer. Thank you for answering that. I know that was kind of a pivot, but I
Yeah,
just felt
it's
like it
hard,
was
but it's
it was
good.
important. Yeah, that was an awesome answer. Okay, I do want to talk about too. You wrote a book. What led you to write this book? And it's about the experiences of children in foster care.
Yeah.
And my team and I got to take a peek at the book, and it is so, like, especially my team, they were like, "This is so awesome!" So, it's really awesome. So I love that you wrote this. What inspired you to write it? What made you want to write this book?
So it's funny, I actually did not set out to write a children's book. I had self-published several devotionals and loved just walking through passages of scripture and finding little teaching moments and telling stories and all of that. And I had written a couple of different devotionals for foster parents, and I had done some writing online. Um, regarding foster care. And my editor actually reached out to me and just said, hey, like, would you be willing to partner with us on a resource for kids? And my first thought was that I thought, maybe I'll do something like for teen girls. I love teen girls, whatever. And my husband had encouraged me to write a kid's book.
Hmm.
Because I had self-published, I'd never thought about it. I was like, I don't even have a story. And that seems like a lot of work, because I don't know how I would find an illustrator. All those things just overwhelm me. So I was like, maybe I'll write a kid's book one day way down the road.
Right.
And so, when my editor approached me and asked me to partner with them, and I was praying about it and talked to my husband, he was like, I think you should do a kid's book. Remember, I've told you you should do that. And the more I thought about it, the more fun it sounded. I just thought, what? I want to do something that's fun. And obviously it's a heavy topic, but, I wanted to do something that my kids could enjoy
Yeah.
and that they could see. And, it just kind of brought back some of the creative juices, like from teaching and working with young kids for so long. I thought, what, I really want to do something that kids are going to enjoy and be able to see and take something from. Because, to be quite honest, I mean, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but adults don't always finish the books they read.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
me, a hundred
I'm like,
percent. Yeah.
a lot of my devotionals, I'm like, who knows if the people who bought them have even read them? But when I think about a kid's book, as a mom, this, like, you read kids' books over and over and over again.
Yeah,
And like they become kind of part of your family culture, and where you
totally.
reference them and you talk about them, and the little characters are like your kids' friends. They're like, oh, And so I just thought, how sweet would it be to be able to write something that people read over and over again, and something that a kid in care could see their experience reflected in, because there's not a lot of books for kids in care from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
And so the story, it takes Elena, and Elena was actually the name that I used to pray for our daughter before I knew her name. When we knew that we were going to be getting like a teenage girl, I would pray for her, and that was her name.
Hmm.
But that's not her real name, but that's the name that I used, that the Lord
Right.
kind of gave me. And what was interesting is that I just was like, okay, Lord, I've never written a kid's book, but I need you to give me a story. And so I just was mulling over and thinking over it, mulling and thinking and praying. And one thing that just stood out to me from our experience fostering, and I think this is unique. I don't think this is every kid. I mean, I wish it were, but I don't think it is. But God had already lined up people within our kids' lives who were believers. So, like for each child that came into our home, it's easy as a foster parent to kind of have that savior mentality and think like, oh, we're doing this wonderful thing, and people will feed that. They're like, oh my goodness, these kids are so lucky to have you. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, actually they're not. Like
Mm,
they're not lucky to be in foster care. And they'll say you're just so wonderful. I could never do what you do, blah, 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 all those things. And I realized that with each of our kids, there were already believers in their lives who have been praying for them, who,
yeah.
were on staff at their school or whatever. Like when we
Wow.
would go to church, like people would say, like, oh, I've been praying for her. I'd see her at school and I know what's going on with the family. We've been praying for that family for a long time. And so the story goes through Elena's journey of when she enters into foster care, and it just shows different people speaking truth over her life
Yeah.
because I wanted to show that there are people in kids' lives who care for them and that they're not alone. And so that was kind of like that overarching message that I just wanted to be able to portray is that kids in care are in a really dark time. They're going through something that is unthinkable, honestly, being ripped away from their home and all the things that they've endured that have led them to that point, but that doesn't mean that God isn't in it. And
Yeah.
we saw that so clearly with all of our experiences. And I think that even if someone isn't aware of people in their lives who have been praying for them, I think that believers are placed in people's lives for that very reason to just offer that protection and that compassion and the spiritual protection too.
Totally. That's so beautiful. I love it. It really is such a sweet book.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, I think it is really sweet. And I love the heart behind it too. And how powerful you were saying too when people are like, oh my goodness, like you're so amazing, they're so lucky to have you, and just the perspective that you have where it's like, actually no, like of course, like they're not lucky to be in this situation. And but how the Lord is using you, and how, like you said, he's also placed other believers like all throughout their lives too. And I think it does just speak to like how much the Lord loves us, like
Yeah.
as people, as his children, as the world. Like he loves us so much that he is wanting us to be his hands and feet to all the people around us. So like for these kids that were brought into your home, and all of the people that were in their lives before you, that were speaking truth and hope and life and purpose into their lives,
Yeah.
and now you too. And yeah, it just is really beautiful to see, even in this, like how much the Lord wants to be involved in our lives and loves us so much. um how do you hope, what is your goal, like how do you hope that this book is used? Who should buy this book? How can we, like spread this message, give this book out? And I think too, and I had a question here, how can it be used by foster families and even just other networks too, and support
Yeah.
networks?
So I think the biggest thing is that even though it is kind of a very specific book, it's talking about foster care. That's a very specific topic, and not everybody has an experience with that. I think that is important to remember is that you probably do actually know someone who's involved in foster care. You just may not realize it because it is so prevalent. There's almost 500,000 kids in our country who are in foster care, and so that means that within your neighborhood or school or church or sports team, like there's someone who is connected to foster care. And so I think for kids in care and for families who are fostering, it's going to be a huge resource because they're able to use it to speak the truth of God's love over them, and for them to be able to see and experience like their own reflected in a book is huge. I mean, I know whenever I read a book, I mean, I'm an adult. I'm like, to read something that mirrors something that I've gone through is like, oh my goodness, like I feel so seen. And
100%.
like, I'm not crazy or whatever.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that for ministries, like for different churches and things, I think just being able to gift it to foster families is huge. But also, honestly, just even within children's ministry or even, at Christian private schools, because I know not always, you can't always have books like this in the public school, just depending on where you're at. But just using it to introduce the topic of foster care to kids, I think is huge. Because when I was younger, I didn't even know what foster care was. Like I knew what adoption was, but I didn't know what foster care was.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important thing for kids to understand, not to scare them, but to help them to see that there are kids whose families look different than yours. And there are kids who are going through different things. And so if you meet someone or you know someone who's going through this, how can you, even as a 7-year-old or 8-year-old, how can you be understanding and compassionate? How can you be encouraging? I think that's huge for kids to be able to see like that there are people with different experiences than the ones that they have right in front of them, because it's very easy for kids to kind of have tunnel vision and just think that everybody's life is just like mine. Everyone has a mom
Yeah.
and a dad and a house with a yard and a dog, and so,
Right.
but just seeing like no, people are different and people go through hard things. I think that's something that kids need to learn at a young age. We can just try and shield them from so much, but I think that using age appropriate language to let them know like, this world is kind of tough, and letting them know that
Yeah.
there are hard things helps them to understand why we need Jesus, and helps them to understand the beauty of redemption and God's purpose and his compassion for us too.
Totally. I love that you mentioned how it can be for kids. Maybe it is in like Sunday school or private Christian school or just, I don't know, a kid in your family, and to kind of get introduced to this concept of foster care. But also, I think the message throughout the book, and it kind of follows this girl, and she's going through these scary things, new things, hard things, and the same encouragement is kind of, given to her, and she's told God's truth throughout it. And so I think even for a child who maybe is not going to have this experience of foster care, but is definitely going to go through something hard at some
Yeah.
point, can be like, okay, like I remember when Elena, went
Yeah.
through this really hard thing, and this was the truth that was encouraged to her. So here in
Yeah.
my completely different but still hard thing, like I can also cling to this truth. So I love that so much. And I know that there are a lot of moms listening, moms with young kids and and aunts, and also people who volunteer at church and stuff like that. So this is definitely for you if you are one of those people who are listening. And I think that's really awesome. Jessica, this was so sweet. Thank you so much for being on the show, for shedding light on foster care, for sharing your experience with us too. And you guys, I've gotten to read this book. It's really, really awesome. And two, where can people find you before I let you go?
Yeah, of course. I'm most active on Instagram, and it's Jessica N. Mathisen. And then, of course, I've got a little podcast, and I do short little seasons and stuff. And so right now I'm just going through a little series based on the book title and talking to people about their experiences with foster care. And
That's really
it's
cool.
called The Fullness of Joy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Jessica N. Mathisen on Instagram. I've got my website is jessicanmathisen.com, and I've got a blog there too. It's not super active. I'm more active on Instagram these days. So
I love it. That's me too. I
yeah.
have like a blog and things on my site, but Instagram's where I'm at too. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. I will link the book in the show notes for anybody listening who wants to grab a copy or several copies. This is something I feel like you can just buy a ton of and support in that way. But thank you so much for coming on. This was so awesome.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.